Chapter 27. The Zode leaped into the air, and Sarah rose nearly half a meter off the deck before crashing off-center back into the dais seat. Pain shrieked through her nervous system, and her brain wobbled inside her skull. She managed to brace herself just as the Zode hit the water, tipped to one side, and nearly capsized. Vision twinkling with stars and nerves screaming in pain throughout her nervous system, she immediately retrieved the ROV controller she'd dropped. The drone's camera showed static lines across the glare of the robot's headlamp. After reorienting it, she pointed it back toward Keko. No creature. No Alan. She rose from the dais and looked out at the ship. It appeared more or less intact, although two floodlights on the starboard side had gone out. Whatever had happened beneath the ocean had pushed the Zode away from the ship and moved the ship itself. "Alan?" she shouted into the comms. Nothing but static, followed by dead air. Rags was yelling over the radio, and Sarah gave her an update, but there wasn't much to report. Before the massive swell, she'd seen a hint of Alan's red flare, although he'd held a hand in front of it to dampen the glow. Now, more than a dozen meters away from Keko's port side, and 10 meters below the surface, the robot saw nothing but water. No M2, no diving lights, no headlamp. Had he destroyed the creature? Sarah told Rags what she was going to do, but she had already hit the throttle, moving the Zode from the starboard aft to port aft. "Hey!" Rags yelled from above her. Sarah looked up at her, and her brain froze for a moment. Keko's port side had a massive dent 3/4 aft, and several cracks near the waterline. Near, but not below. With the ship's engines still idling, she had to yell to be heard. "Going further out!" Rags shook her head, her AR pointed at the sky. "Get up here!" Sarah ignored Rags and motored away from Keko, heading where she thought Alan had last been. Instead of using the Zode's low hull lights, she powered on the spotlights and slowly panned them across the water. With the Zode moving at a single knot, the boat covered half a meter of ocean surface a second. She killed the throttle and put the engine into idle. She eyed the anchor, considered dropping it, and decided it was a bad idea. If she needed to move fast, it would be impossible if she had to pull it up. Now, every decision mattered. Every moment mattered. Alan could be drowning or already dead, or maybe he was being consumed right this... "Shut it, boss," Given's ghostly voice said in her mind. "Focus." "Right. Focus and don't panic. Solve the problem." She left the dais again, grabbed one of the powerful portable floodlights, and shined it on the water between the Zode and Keko. This is where he was. She knew it. Something bumped against the hull and she froze. She listened for a moment, her free hand touching the cool metal of her AR. The waves continued rocking the Zode with gentle pushes. With each passing second, the Zode slowly approached Keko's port side. She half hoped to hear the bump again, fearing it would be Alan's body that floated up from beneath the hull. Not exactly the outcome she was hoping for. The sound came again, only this time more insistent. "Alan?" she asked over the comms. The Zode bumped upward slightly, and Sarah's teeth clacked together. She slowly unslung the AR and dropped the floodlight to the deck. The bump had come from beneath the bow. She crouch-walked from the dais as silently as possible, cringing every time the boat's hull creaked in the gentle swells. "You still don't know if it can hear," she told herself. "So why are you so petrified?" "Because I don't know," she mouthed to no one. Damn Hollingsworth and the Miskatonic crew for not conducting those tests. Then again, while M2 could see with its eye stalks or eye clusters, it had never extruded anything that looked like it was made for sound. Maybe the creature was utterly deaf? "Want to bet your life on a maybe?" She clenched her teeth and continued until she was half a meter from the bow. Water dappled the deck and the gunnels, remnants from the giant swell that had nearly drowned her. The hull creaked again, and she thought she heard a bump beneath her. Sarah didn't know she had any adrenaline left, but the gland had pumped another round into her system. Fear, stress, and excitement were responsible for her body prepping its nervous system to fight or flee. Flee. Laughable. If M2 was sitting just below the boat, she was already screwed, blued, and tattooed, as one of her drill instructors liked to say. In other words, she could do next to nothing to stop the beast if it wanted the Zode. She listened intently, but the waves lapping at the boat and Keko's distant engine sounds were all she could hear apart from the occasional bird call. She swallowed hard and spoke softly into her headset. "Alan, are you there?" Nothing. "You don't need to go to the bow," her brain told her. "You don't need to know. Just head back to the ship." Yes, that would be the smart thing to do. The smart thing. The rational thing. She grinned. To not want to know, to not have to know, even despite rationality or logic, was about as human as it got. People were just built that way. Regardless, she kept the AR in front of her and took another step forward, ears focusing on every sound, although the heartbeat in her ears made that difficult. When she reached the bow, she cautiously peered over, her brain screaming that she was about to be caught by a tentacle. She idly wondered if she'd drown before being eaten. She honestly wasn't sure which of the two was the better option. Nothing in the water in front of her. She moved closer and looked straight down. A diving fin, sans foot, bobbed in front of the bow. Shit, Sarah said aloud, forgetting the creature might be able to hear her. She continued staring, hoping against hope she'd see the glare of another flare far beneath the water, but no such luck. She did, however, see a sparkle. Oh, fuck, Sarah said, and silently walked back to the dais. After sitting in the chair, she brought up the ROV once more. The display still had the occasional wave of static, but remained steady, the current pushing motes of ocean detritus that moved like snowflakes past the camera. She pushed the throttle slightly, ascended, and cursed the system for not having a map to show her where the drone was. Instead, she had to raise it, find the ship or the Zode, and reposition the ROV. Finding Kekko's hull lights, those that remained, was much easier than finding the Zode. She turned the robot and brought it back to the boat while keeping its nose pointed at a diagonal. The robot dove as it moved closer. She cut the floodlights, paused, and looked for the red glare of Alan's flare, or maybe the glow of his headlamp. Still nothing. A threat of panic touched her brain, and she fought it off. Focus. If he's already dead, there's not a damn thing you can do about it. But he could still be alive, the panic animal said, and while you're wasting time, he could be dying. Hurry the fuck up. Sarah didn't bother telling the voice to shut up. She'd already pushed it away. Hoping against hope, she kept the drone descending, slowing now and then to rotate 360 degrees before continuing the dive. Nothing. The robot's floodlight finally shone on the white sand, and her heart froze. A bolt rifle lay on the ocean floor. The panic animal growled again, but she ignored it. Instead of hovering near the rifle, Sarah piloted the drone in a wide circle around the area. Somewhere down here, Alan was either dead or alive. With a single fin, his mobility would be for shit. If he were still alive, he'd have no chance of escaping him too. Helplessness and hopelessness were not feelings Rags was used to. She'd left all that behind long ago after escaping a shit-splat town in rural Australia. Her tenure with K&B and the animals had been the most meaningful part of her life. Now, it was all ending. Hippie was dead, Alan MIA, and now they were on the verge of sinking. Worse, they didn't even know if M2 had been destroyed. Right now, it could be heading for them from beneath the waves, ready to smash the hull again and take Kekko down to the ocean floor. Fate wasn't something you could headshot. You couldn't plant explosives on depression and send it to the ether. Nor could you silence grief with a garrote. Focus! Rags turned to Harper. What's the status? The older woman shrugged. Sinclair says he'll weld a patch or two. It'll take him at least an hour to get everything set, and he'll need some help. Rags ground her teeth. Her dentist had told her she'd eventually lose the front ones if she kept doing that, but it was a nervous tick she couldn't seem to kick. And if there was any time for anxiety, this was it. An hour, she mused. We might be fucking dead in an hour. Harper grunted and narrowed her eyes. You've done this job for how long? You know it's always a possibility. Only it could be seconds instead of minutes. The deadpan delivery, so matter-of-fact as though she were telling you the sky was blue, stopped Rags' thoughts from spinning. Harper's face hinted at no emotion at all. God, but the woman sometimes scared Rags. Right, she finally said. We need more grenades, AP style. Now you're talking, Harper said. Be back in a minute with your armor-piercing grenades. Only have a few left, I think. Rags said nothing to that. Harper broke her stare and quickly walked to the hold stairs. Before the older woman had taken 5 steps, Rags had turned back to the gunwale. The Zode, at least 40 meters away and drifting further out to sea, was the only thing visible in the darkness beyond the glare of Kekko's hull lights. The Zode's red running lights made the boat appear like some strange waterborne UFO. Rags could just make out Sarah's figure moving around every few seconds. What was she doing?
Salty, status?
When Sarah didn't immediately respond, Rags pursed her lips and fought to keep herself from repeating the hail.
Here, Nest. Found one of Alan's fins in his bolt rifle.
When she'd heard Sarah's voice, she'd relaxed the slightest bit. But the news about Alan was more than enough to make her shake. Before, there'd at least been some hope.
Salty, you see any signs of M2?
Rags asked.
Saw something. I think it was the creature, but I'm not sure. Could have been debris. What do you think, Salty?
That we assume M2's alive and we'll head back to Keko. Don't let your guard down, Nest.
You neither, Salty. Sinclair's going to Patchweld in a while, but we have to hold out until sunrise. Over.
Going to keep looking with the robot, Nest. I'll give it another 15 minutes and then I'm heading back. Over.
15 minutes. Dawn might be less than an hour away, but that was an eternity. Sarah and Alan, if he were still alive, were completely exposed. A thought occurred to Rags. If she were right, it would draw the creature right to the ship and spare the Zode. The only problem was that it could ram them if it thought its prey was getting away.
Harper?
Rags called over the comms.
We need to get this bucket moving.
Chapter 28. Everything was dark, and Alan's head ached as though a bomb had gone off inside his skull. Not an explosive one either. No, this one had been a fragmentation grenade, leaving him feeling as though his brain had been shredded, and reality was something for other people. Sane people. People who weren't lying face down on the sand dozens of meters below the ocean's surface. With his dive belt still attached, he'd had more than enough ballast to keep from rising to the surface. At least M2 hadn't managed to find him bobbing on the water like a fishing floater. Small favors. He blinked and slowly rolled over onto his back. Just lie here for a minute, he told himself, his headlamp light stabbing through the darkness and toward the ocean's surface. The flickering beam of light split into two divergent images before snapping back into one, and a manic monkey began battering the inside of his skull, making him wince. Concussed? Oh yeah. The explosion had damn near ripped his head off. Once he'd thrown the grenade, he'd had roughly 10 seconds to swim as far and as fast as possible. Unfortunately, he hadn't been fast enough or far enough. The underwater shock wave from the detonation had sent him tumbling, and everything had gone dark. Explosion. Could an AP grenade have caused that kind of maelstrom? No. Had to have been M2. Some part of the creature had gone up. He wasn't naive enough to think it had been the whole creature. If that had been the case, he doubted he'd still be in one piece. His mask had a crack in one corner, but the water hadn't yet rushed in. K&B paid top dollar for the best, the same gear the world's best military used, and that was the only reason he hadn't drowned. His body ached as though a kaiju had stomped him, and his left foot occasionally screamed in pain. Alan peered at his legs. He was missing a flipper. Fuck. Where the hell was he? He tried to sit up, eliciting a field of stars that immediately shimmered across his vision. He shook his head, but the stars only increased in number, and he nearly passed out. He paused, slowed his breathing, and waited for his vision to clear. Once the starry sky had disappeared, he tried to sit up again as slowly as he could. The pain was bearable, but savage. The shockwave must have bent him like a pretzel. A pained grin lit his face. At least his spine seemed okay. Again, small favors. He sat at the bottom of the reef. The coral skeletons remained mostly intact, the structure stable and sound, but they looked more like the bones of a nightmarish, misshapen creature from a Lovecraft story than something that had once been a mainstay of the biome. He'd wanted to see the reef for himself, up close, but not like this. This was like having been dropped into an open grave atop a rotting corpse. Alan could practically feel the ghostly remains of the millions of creatures that had been killed hours ago. Absorbed. Converted. To what? To M2, whatever that means. The massive bony structure had plenty of crevices to hide in, or so it seemed. If M2 had only partially combusted, it might now be small enough to flow into the ravished coral reef and protect itself from the sun's deadly rays. Alan continued panning the area, his flickering headlamp illuminating seemingly endless tunnels through the coral. Could M2 cling to the side of the reef and stay in the shadows until the sun set? Hippie's face entered his mind, and his pained apathy disappeared, replaced by white, hot anger. Not bloody fucking likely, Alan thought. M2, you die today. Speaking of dying, how much air did he have left? Alan checked the lead and blinked. He'd had a full tank when he'd left the Zode. Before the massive explosion, he'd spent maybe 10 minutes of his air supply. Now he was at a relatively low 40%. Did he have a leak? He couldn't possibly have been down here that long. Have to surface. He reached for the bolt rifle and realized it wasn't on his shoulder. Shit. He scanned the immediate area around him, hoping against hope to see the rifle's matte black silhouette. His headlamp light might be powerful, but there was no way he was going to find the damn thing unless it was nearby. He had 2 phosphorus grenades. He had a knife. He had 2 hands and legs and a semi-functional brain. That's all I have. And with a single fin to boot. The headlamp stuttered a few times before returning to life with a mostly stable beam. He reached for the handheld flashlight in his belt, but there was nothing there. The UV light was gone too. So fucked, he thought. Salty, Nist, come in. No response. Too deep, he thought. Without a booster, they weren't going to hear him. For that, he had to surface. You sure you want to do that? It could be up there. Could also be down here, you melt. Get moving. He stood despite the massive rush of pain that racked his spine and neck and slowly rotated, doing his best to memorize every nook and cranny between him and the ocean surface. Didn't look too bad. A straight shot. Just swim up. Easy for you to say, he thought. He couldn't move nearly as fast with a single fin. Moreover, he had to worry about pushing himself off course and colliding with the reef wall. Compared to the risk of encountering M2, he'd gladly face a few perforations through his suit. Anything to get back to the surface. He switched off the flickering headlamp, and the world became a sightless, silent abyss, punctuated only by the sound of the bubbles rising from his rebreather and the ocean's ever-present whisper. His skin puckered with goose flesh beneath his wetsuit, and he took a deep breath. Go, he said softly, bending his knee to push himself upward. The breath hitched in his throat as he saw the glow of a light floating a few meters above the reef wall. Sarah? He wondered. Fuck, he hoped she wasn't up there swimming. The light turned for a moment, and Alan saw the outline of a cable. A grin lit his face. The ROV. Sarah must be piloting it. Without another thought, Alan flexed and pushed as hard as he could, his body rising from the ocean floor, leaving tiny clouds of sand in its wake. The ROV's powerful floodlight moved while he shot upward, his hands doing their best to keep him steadily swimming toward the surface. He managed to rise 5 meters rather quickly. Even with the nitrox gas in his tank, he didn't want to risk the bends, so he stopped kicking and tread water for an agonizing 60 seconds before kicking for the surface, for all he was worth. M2 rested on the bottom of the sandy ocean floor. The 30 meters of water separating it from the surface would keep it safe for the moment, but that last encounter had nearly destroyed it. Its eye stalks and clusters had seen the food rise above the ocean surface and throw something. The projectile had landed near its less armored back. In response, M2 had split itself into 2, abandoning nearly 20% of its mass to escape. The entity that spawned from that 20% was only instinctively aware for 2 seconds before the projectile detonated in a flash of painfully bright white light. The vibration of the explosion had rocked M2 and cracked the creature's shell in multiple places. Had it been any closer to the explosion, it would have been annihilated. It couldn't replace its lost mass without venturing back into the ocean and far away from known shelter, or possible shelter. The idea that it could use the ship as a readout from the sun still fluttered around its diminished neural network, but M2 had already decided against another run at the ship. The food was dangerous. This side of the lifeless reef wall offered plenty of possibilities for it to squirm its way in and digest some of the coral skeletons to make a contiguous space. However, it would have to abandon its solid form to fit inside. It sensed a familiar vibration, and its eye stalks simultaneously turned upward to gaze at the dim light moving through the water. Light. The kind that didn't hurt. It was the non-food thing again, floating over the top of the reef. Like a predator. M2 didn't know the word, but it was familiar with the concept. Some portion of its ancestral memory, or an innate instinct, rattled through its network and found the fight or flight response. The creature had to move to ensure the strange light didn't see it, or attack the thing before it had the chance. The vibration-making thing hadn't displayed hostile behavior, but that didn't mean it didn't have a weapon as powerful as the one that had nearly destroyed it. M2 had to be wary if it wanted to survive. It waited while the light rotated in a circle 15 meters above the reef wall. The beam provided more than enough light to illuminate M2 if the thing pointed downward, but the vibration maker showed no sign of descending or changing its attitude. The creature gave the strange thing another moment to pass by and disappear, before moving slowly along the reef wall. Now it wanted to go after the ship again, somehow knowing the undigestible material would also protect it from the light. No time, though. It would have to stay here and hide within the reef. So long as the thing in the water didn't find him too, the creature was sure it could survive and feed if the food made the mistake of chasing it down. Sarah saw a shadow move just beyond the drone's headlamp. She wasn't sure, but it had seemed nearly as dark as M2 was supposed to be, not the sparkling ash color she'd seen earlier. Had the creature changed form again? She dropped a hand to the AP grenade still in her belt. If her estimation was correct, the drone was more than 15 meters away. She couldn't possibly hurl a grenade that far and be sure it would explode at the proper depth. She'd have to move closer. Move closer, she thought, and you risk getting the drone tangled up in the cables. That was true, but if she had a shot at destroying the thing once and for all, it would be worth it. Besides, the creature might come for the drone if it appeared defenseless. No, she thought. Distress would be more like it. Turn the drone into a fish on a hook and jerk it around as though it were caught. That's the way to handle it. But she might need the drone. If Alan had somehow survived, she'd have to use it to fish him out of the water, or at least keep him afloat until she could pick him up. Lots of maybes, Gibbons' voice said in her mind. You like maybes today, boss. True, she said to the voice. But what else is there? Sarah put down the controller and goosed the Zode's electric motors. It responded immediately, and she traveled another 10 meters into the ocean. Assuming M2 didn't return an attack, the tide would slowly push her back to Keko, but this would have to do for now. She picked up the controller again, pointed the drone upward, and looked for the Zode's lights. The robot appeared to be less than a dozen meters away, although it remained more than 7 meters below the surface. Now somewhat sure of where the robot floated, she pushed the drone further out to sea. In a few moments, she'd crossed the top of the massive reef wall to the other side. How deep had they said it was? 40 meters? That was a deep dive, even for a professional, without having to decompress on the way up. He's dead, you idiot, she said to herself. And all you're doing by staying out here is giving M2 another shot at a free meal. So why are you doing this? Because you never abandon your squad. Never. She hadn't done that in the sandbox while Sunnis and Shiites, regardless of their country of origin, fought tooth and nail to annihilate one another. She hadn't done it when 3 of her squad members were blown up by an IED, limbs lost, and bodies perforated in more places than she could count. She, Givens, and Perkins had protected those soldiers while waiting for an evac that arrived too late to save a single one of them. That had been the hardest day of her life, watching kids, 20-somethings, die in a foreign land where the combatants considered no one innocent. She shook off the memory, a cloud of depression, frustration, and futility threatening to eclipse every other thought. Don't break now. She sighed heavily and rotated the robot in another 360-degree pan of the water, bopping the attitude up and down in semi-jerky motions. The screen, static lines occasionally marring its high-def image, displayed nothing but shadows beyond the light's range. Where had it gone? She was sure the shadow hadn't been a trick of the light. Should she try to follow it? If she did, she might lead M2 back to the Zode. A mischievous grin crossed her face. If it came for her, she could toss that grenade and maybe scare it away from Keko. Someone needed to survive to tell more what had happened. If she could save Rags, Kojo, Sinclair, and Harper, maybe, just maybe, she'd save this biome from the creature. It was the best she could hope for. Sarah set the robot in a slow descent over the reef wall, her eyes watching for movement.